In 2002, a young girl was startled awake by the sound of her bedroom window sliding open. She stayed perfectly still, eyes shut, heart pounding, too afraid to move. When she finally dared to look, a man was already inside, creeping toward her older sister's bed. The intruder pulled out a knife, pressed it to her sister's throat, and hissed, "You better be quiet and I won't hurt you." Terrified and frozen in place, the younger girl could only watch as Elizabeth was taken from the room and led out into the darkness. Hours passed before she found the courage to run to her parents and whisper the unthinkable. Elizabeth had been kidnapped. Meanwhile, Elizabeth was dragged deep into the woods where a hidden campsite awaited. There, a man and his wife forced her into disturbing rituals and subjected her to constant torment. For the next 9 months, that wilderness prison became her reality. But her story did not end in the shadows. Months later, after her abduction had been broadcast nationwide, a passerby recognized Elizabeth on the street, with her captors beside her. The man who had stolen Elizabeth's childhood, Brian David Mitchell, was sentenced to life in federal prison. His wife, Wanda Barzee, received 15 years behind bars.
On a sunny morning in the summer of 2001, Andrea Yates drowned each of her 5 children, one by one, in her bathtub. She started with 3 of her little boys and then her 6-month-old daughter, who she left floating in the tub. When her last little boy came in and saw his baby sister in the water, he asked his mom what was wrong with her before running away. Andrea chased him down and drowned him as well. She then laid them all in her bed, tucked them under the covers, with one of them holding the baby girl, as if they were all sleeping. Andrea would later be found not guilty by reason of insanity and sent off to a psychiatric hospital where she remains to this day. She's had the opportunity to leave and return back into society, but she's refused to leave the hospital. This is one of those cases that is really heavy, and it sparks a lot of conversation about postpartum depression and psychosis, and how religion played into her delusions and hallucinations. I have 3 little babies myself, so I think that's also why this case weighs so heavy on my heart. As always, this is a really graphic story, so proceed with caution. But let's talk about the case that shocked the entire world. This is Andrea Yates. She grew up in Texas and was the youngest of 5 kids. From a really young age, she suffered from eating disorders and depression, and once she turned 17, that's when she started contemplating ending her own life. Despite all of this, she persevered, and she graduated high school in 1982 as the valedictorian of her class. She was an extremely smart girl and super athletic too, as she was the captain of her swim team. After graduating college, she went on to become a registered nurse at a really prestigious hospital in Houston, and in 1989, she met Rusty Yates, who she would later marry. Rusty was a NASA engineer, so pretty smart as well, and they bonded over their views on Christianity and religion. Immediately after marriage, Rusty and Andrea vowed to have as many babies as nature would allow them, and this was really the start of their downfall. They began moving back and forth between Texas and Florida for Rusty's job, usually living in really small trailers and motorhomes, and by 1999, they had 4 kids together. So moving around that much in small places paired with having so many kids back to back, it started to take a toll on Andrea. Her first baby was Noah, then John, then Paul, then Luke, and lastly, baby Mary in 2000. Not long after Luke was born in 1999, Rusty came home one day and found her shaking and chewing on her own fingers. And the day after this, she tried ending her own life by overdosing. This put her in the hospital where she was prescribed some antidepressants. But overall, nobody really knew the extent of her mental health decline or how serious the situation was starting to become. She was released almost immediately, where she then begged Rusty to let her end her own life while holding a knife up to her throat. She was once again hospitalized for this, where she was put on an antipsychotic medication called Haldol. This medication plays a big factor as this case continues. After being put on Haldol, her condition improved pretty quickly, so once again she was released and instructed to keep taking the medication. But in July of 1999, so just 1 month after that first hospitalization, she had a nervous breakdown accompanied by 2 suicide attempts and 2 more psychiatric stays. This is when she was officially diagnosed with postpartum psychosis, mainly because she had thoughts of killing her children to save them from going to hell. Her first psychiatrist really understood the severity of the situation and urged Andrea and Rusty to not have any more children. They were warned that having more children would pretty much guarantee future psychotic depression, but sadly, they did not listen. Within 7 weeks of being released from this hospital stay and after being diagnosed with postpartum psychosis, Andrea was pregnant with her 5th and final child. Andrea seemed to be doing okay, all things considered, up until her dad died died in March of 2001. This is when she reverted back into psychosis, started mutilating herself, and would frantically always be reading the Bible. At this point, she had her last child, and baby Mary was right around 4 months old, which is around the age when she started eating real food and not just milk. But because Andrea was in psychosis, she stopped feeding Mary the amount she needed. Her condition continued to get worse until she was in a near catatonic state, which once again landed her in the hospital. It's now May of 2001, 1 month before the murders of these beautiful babies. This is when Andrea switched psychiatrists, and even though she was obviously not doing well and in a catatonic state, this doctor thought it would be a good idea to completely take her off Haldol, the only medication that showed some sort of improvement. Even though she was clearly ill, Andrea was once again released back home to take care of her babies. It wouldn't be long though until she was hospitalized once more after filling up her bathtub in the middle of the day. She later told police that she had planned to drown each of her kids that day, but she changed her mind. She then planned to kill herself in the tub, but was hospitalized before she got the chance to do so. This brings us to that fateful day, June 20th, 2001. That morning, Rusty left Andrea at home to go to work, meaning she was alone with the kids. This was something that was not supposed to happen per her doctor's orders, saying she basically needed to be supervised 24/7, otherwise she could cause herself or her babies harm. But nevertheless, Rusty left that day, and I guess he thought that it would be okay because Andrea's mom was supposed to be coming over within the next hour to take over kid duty. But in that 1 hour period, Andrea snapped and did the unimaginable. In that 60 minutes, Andrea drowned all 5 of her kids, one by one, in the bathtub. She started with Paul, then Luke, and then John. And once they were all deceased, she laid them in her bed under the covers. She then grabbed baby Mary and drowned her as well, leaving her face down and floating in the tub. This is when 7-year-old Noah walked into the bathroom and saw his baby sister, and he asked his mom what was wrong with her. It's not known what she said, but whatever it was, it scared Noah so much that he took off running. Sadly, Andrea caught up to him and drowned him as well, right next to his baby sister. This time, she took baby Mary's body and put her in John's arms in the bed, as if they were all sleeping, and she left Noah floating in the tub. Andrea then very calmly called 911 and told the operator that she needed an officer, but she wouldn't tell them why. When police and paramedics arrived at her house, they walked into a very disturbing and heartbreaking scene. Needless to say, Andrea was quickly arrested, where she then confessed to drowning all 5 of her kids one by one in the tub. She told police that she waited for her husband Rusty to leave for work because she knew he would interrupt her killing them. And she also went out of her way to lock their family dog up in a cage, which it usually wasn't, because she knew that the dog would also try and interfere with her drowning the kids. Despite her eerie confession, Rusty stood by her and actually got one of their family friends to be her attorney. At the trial, the main focal point was Andrea's postpartum depression and psychosis, and her team was trying to push for the not guilty by reason of insanity plea. The defense agreed that she was psychotic and very ill, but Texas law requires that in order to successfully assert the insanity defense, the defendant must prove that they could not discern right from wrong at the time of the crime. And in this case, it was hard to prove because she admitted to waiting for Rusty to leave for work to kill her kids, even going so far as to subdue the dog so it wouldn't get in her way. Because of this, at the first trial in 2002, the jury rejected the insanity defense. They found her guilty on all 5 counts of murder, and although prosecutors sought the death penalty, Andrea was ultimately sentenced to life in prison with eligibility for parole in 40 years. This sentence didn't last very long though, because in 2006, the Texas Court of Appeals reversed the conviction. One of the main reasons for doing this was because a California psychologist and prosecution witness for this case, named Dr. Park Dietz, admitted to giving a false testimony during Andrea's trial. He gave a testimony that right before the murders, an episode of Law & Order aired on TV that featured a woman who drowned her kids, but was acquitted of murder by reason of insanity. What's super crazy and coincidental though, is that an author who just so happened to be covering the Yates trial for the Oprah magazine and NBC News had also previously been a writer for Law & Order, and she knew for a fact that no such episode like the one Dr. Park mentioned had ever existed at this point. It just wasn't true. And so the Texas Court of Appeals then said that the jury could have been influenced by this false testimony, so a new trial was needed. A little side note before I continue, but a Law & Order episode did air 2 years later that was based on Andrea's case, but it never existed at the time of the trial. So at the new trial, authorities tried saying that Andrea committed this crime for spousal revenge, but this avenue was thoroughly explored and no evidence was found for this. This time around, Andrea pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, and the new jury agreed with this. She was then granted immediate release on the condition that she be admitted to a mental health treatment facility, at least for some time before returning back into society. So off Andrea went to the Kerrville State Hospital, where she has remained ever since. Every year, she's able to go through a competency hearing, where it could be a real possibility for her to be released. But time and time again, she waives her right to the hearing, voluntarily choosing to stay at the mental health facility. I don't know if this is a sign of guilt or if she truly doesn't think she can get better, but one of the biggest points of contention in this case is Rusty's role or responsibility. Andrea's doctor advised him not to leave her alone with the kids at any point, but in the weeks leading up to the murders, he did just that. He said he thought that it would help her improve her independence. He confessed to her family just 1 week before this tragic event that he would leave her alone for an hour every morning and every night. And he did this so she wouldn't be so totally dependent on him and his family for her own maternal responsibilities. His view on mental health was reportedly not great, and Andrea's family said that Rusty believed all depressed people needed was a swift kick in the pants to get them motivated. These were all his words. Rusty also said that he was never made aware that she was psychotic, or that her first doctor advised against having more children, even though the doctor's notes clearly stated that it should not happen. But what's super sad is that Andrea told her prison psychiatrist that this was not the case, and that prior to her and Rusty's last child, she did not want to have sex because that meant that she could possibly hurt her kids. But Rusty pressured her into it, saying not to worry, she was a good mom and could handle more kids. But Rusty even said during the trial that he thought she'd be found innocent, and he wanted to have even more kids with her once she was treated by any means necessary. How crazy is that? She was so mentally ill that she killed all 5 of their kids one by one. Yet his strong religious beliefs made him want to continue having kids with her by any means necessary. That's twisted and super disturbing, and honestly, so irresponsible and dangerous of him. Once she was initially found guilty, Rusty went on the record and blamed her new psychiatrist, not himself, for not recognizing and treating her psychosis. He said they legally had to release her from the hospital after 10 days due to an insurance constraint from their provider, Blue Cross Blue Shield. This, in his words, makes it their fault. A different doctor weighing in kind of backed him up on this logic, saying the reason Andrea did this could be because of Effexor, which is an antidepressant. Her new psychiatrist had taken her cold turkey off of Haldol and put her on this other drug. So for the entire month before the murders, Andrea was taking 450 milligrams of Effexor, which is twice the recommended maximum dose. This drug was known to possibly cause homicidal ideations. Other doctors say that this dosage/prescription isn't completely unusual, and it could have nothing to do with her committing this crime. It could also be that she stopped taking Haldol cold turkey, which caused her to snap. While she was in prison, Andrea told her psychiatrist that she had been partially influenced by a close family friend on Rusty's side who was very religious. This caused her to believe that her kids were going to hell and couldn't be saved because of her own struggles, and the only way out was to kill them. She said she planned to kill them for about 2 years, and then went on to say, quote, "It was the 7th deadly sin. My children weren't righteous. They stumbled because I was evil. The way I was raising them, they could never be saved. They were doomed to perish in the fires of hell." End quote. In 2005, Rusty divorced Andrea and went on to get remarried and have another child. They have since divorced as well. This is one of the few cases that really shook not just Texas, but the entire world. What makes this case so haunting isn't just what she did, it's that she seemingly loved her kids. Every single person who knows her says that. But postpartum depression and psychosis had such a terrifying grip on her that love wasn't enough to fight it. And here's what really disturbs me. Postpartum depression affects up to 1 in 5 new moms. Happens in about 2 out of every 1,000 births. Those numbers might sound small, but when it's left untreated, the consequences can be catastrophic, and yet nobody wants to talk about it. There's so much stigma around this and so much silence. But if we keep looking away, if we keep treating it like something that only happens once in a blue moon, then tragedies like this don't just stay in the past, they repeat. And that's the part that should keep all of us up at night.
They found a goodbye note in her bedroom before she was murdered, but did she even write the note, or did the killer fake the whole thing? It was July 2014 in Fairfield in Illinois. Megan Nichols was a beautiful 15-year-old girl from the area. Now, she was bubbly, friendly, and she was also really thoughtful. That's what her loved ones loved about her so much, was that she always put other people's feelings above her own, and she'd always go above and beyond to try and make people's day, make them laugh. But things were a little bit frosty at home between her and her mum, Kathy, because Megan was being a normal teenage girl and getting involved with guys that she probably shouldn't have. Her mum was super annoyed because Megan had been dating this slightly older guy, I think he was a couple of years older, called Brody Merbarger. I feel like it's a normal rite of passage as a teenage girl to date somebody that your mum can't stand. But there was also stuff that was going on behind the scenes that the mum would also have been livid about. Basically, Brody was kind of playing Megan and another girl off against each other. He was dating them both. He was stringing them both along, and he was also bragging to his friends that he was able to do this. It was pretty gross. He would spend loads of time with Megan, make out like Megan was his girlfriend, and then take another girl to prom. So Kathy, having just known about basically the age difference, had banned Megan from seeing Brody, and she'd also confiscated her phone. But Brody was raging about this and showed up to her home and had a full-on argument with the mum, calling her controlling. Eventually this kind of simmered down and Megan was allowed to have her phone back, and she did promise her mum that she wouldn't see this guy anymore. On the 3rd of July, Megan and her mum had planned to do something that day together, but Megan told Kathy, "Oh, I'm just feeling a little bit unwell. You crack on without me and I'll just stay at home." So the mum did. However, by the time the mum had actually got home, run her errands and done what she needed to do for the day, Megan had vanished. Her mum had gone into her bedroom to say goodnight to her and she was just nowhere to be seen. But there was something very disturbing in Megan's bedroom. Firstly, there was Megan's phone, which was very strange because she'd kicked up such a fuss about having her phone confiscated before that you would think that she would have taken her phone with her. Like, she never just left her phone of her own accord. Secondly, the phone had been factory reset. Why the hell would she have done that to her phone? Finally, there was a note in the bedroom that was incredibly disturbing. For my fellow Jersey Shore lovers, I'm like, who wrote the note? It said, "I love you, but I will never be happy here. Don't look for me." So obviously everybody did in fact start looking for her. Obviously nobody's just gonna leave it. Oh, okay, she doesn't want to be found, let's just leave it. But there were no clues to where she could have gone and nobody could find absolutely anything. Obviously police did question this Brody because the mum was like, he's dodgy and he's been involved with her, and he stuck to the story that he didn't know where she was. However, literally the day after she went missing, he was up at 8 a.m. cleaning his car. Why are you cleaning your car, Brody? I feel like my viewers now know this is sus 101, cleaning your car after somebody's murdered or vanished. Police also found a suspicious looking stain in the boot of his car, so they took this off for analysis, but it did come back as negative for blood, which was strange because it had looked like blood. We'll come back to this. Weeks, then months, then years passed with still no sign of Megan. I can't imagine what that was like for her family. Then something odd happened in 2016. Brody randomly crashed his car into a tree. I don't know whether he had been under the influence, I guess so. He told a friend he just passed out at the wheel and smashed straight into a tree. The FBI luckily then managed to track this car down. This was the original car that he'd been seen cleaning the day after Megan's disappearance. Now, the car wreck was found at a salvage yard and they did more testing in the boot of that car and then eventually figured out that the stuff in the boot was Megan's blood. I don't know how the previous tests had missed this. So at this point, Brody's friend Kyle started to suspect Brody, even though he'd never admitted anything to him. He actually agreed to wear a wire for the detectives to try and get Brody to confess to him on tape. He confronted Brody and literally said to him, "Why is her blood in your car?" And Brody denied any kind of knowledge of any of this. And he did say something very interesting though. He said he'd had a bad day the day that Megan disappeared. He said he'd had barely any sleep and, quote, "I probably couldn't even have lifted my own body weight, much less strangled, if someone with anger issues found out about something and strangled her." That feels like a weird confession to me. Anyway, then finally on Boxing Day 2017, bear in mind we don't have Megan's body by this point, finally female remains were found in Wayne County in a shallow grave, and police identified these remains as Megan. So finally, with Megan's remains found, Megan's blood in Brody's old car, he was finally charged with her murder. And text messages off his phone actually did reveal that him and Megan had been discussing potentially running away together, but obviously she didn't live to tell the tale. He was found guilty and was given 50 years in prison.
This 16-year-old boy joined a satanic cult and then claimed that demons made him go on a murder spree. Luke Woodham was raised in Pearl, Mississippi and was the youngest of 2 sons. Life at home was extremely turbulent. His parents were constantly fighting in front of his 2 sons until his father just got up and abandoned the family. Luke's mother was rarely ever home, and when she was home, she was a strict disciplinarian. According to Luke, on one occasion when his mother caught him smoking, she forced him to chain smoke 40 smokes in a row until he got sick. There was another occasion where she forced him to eat out of the trash can because he didn't finish his dinner. Life at school was no better for Luke. In fact, it was probably worse. Due to his appearance, Luke was a target for major bullying, and for most of his life, his only friend was his puppy Sparkles. The highlight of his school experience was a very short relationship he actually had with another student named Christina Menifee. Christina was new to their school and she was such a sweetheart. She actually only gave Luke a chance because she realized that he didn't have any other friends. Luke said that he loved Christina more than anyone or anything in his entire life, and that this was the first time in his entire life that he cared for someone that also cared for him back. But Christina said that Luke was actually very controlling and that he didn't want her to be friends with anyone but him. Also, that Luke's mother was oddly possessive over him and would actually join them for all of their dates. So after about 3 weeks of dating, Christina broke up with Luke, and this absolutely destroyed him. Luke spent the next handful of months in a very dark, lonely place until he became friends with Grant Boyette. Grant was 2 years older than Luke and was raised very religious until he turned to Satanism. Grant became the leader of a group of outcasts at their high school in like a satanic cult-esque group of teenage boys. Grant recruited Luke into this group and actually told Luke that Satan had hand-chosen him. And to prove his powers and like the power of Satan, allegedly Grant put a spell on a boy at their school, and the next day that boy actually got hit by a car and died. And after this, Luke was a true and dedicated believer of this group, and he fully looked up to and followed Grant. And this was actually the first time in his entire life that Luke had a group of friends. This group that Luke joined, that Grant was the leader of, really centered violence and revenge and murder. And at one point, Luke, and I don't know why Luke did this, but in a very brutal and horrific way, killed his puppy Sparkles, who at one point was his only friend. And in extreme gruesome detail, he actually wrote about the entire thing in his journal, which is online, but I do not recommend you reading it. And as this group became more and more disturbing and dangerous and violent, a lot of the boys actually started leaving the group. There was one boy that left the group because Luke and Grant was trying to convince him to murder his dad because his dad gave him a curfew. That boy actually ended up reporting to the police that his friends had become like really dangerous and he was scared of what they might do, but the police just ignored him. And by fall of 1997, Luke, Grant, and this group of boys were planning for Luke to commit a mass murder at their high school, specifically targeting Luke's ex-girlfriend Christina. And on September 30th, 1997, after a big fight with his mom, Luke actually called one of the boys from the group and told him that the next morning he was going to murder his mom. And the next morning, October 1st, 1997, after Luke's mother, Marianne, woke up, her 16-year-old son, Luke, snuck up behind her with a baseball bat and hit her over and over again. He then used a blade on her 17 times, which was tragically fatal, and this was just full of rage. And that friend that Luke spoke to the night before actually ended up calling him to ask him if he went through with it. And Luke said, yeah, I just killed my mom. And still, this boy didn't report this to the police. And if he did, he might have been able to stop what happened next. A few hours later, Luke got in his mom's car and drove to the school. 16-year-old Luke made it to Pearl High School with a weapon. It was 1997, 2 years before Columbine, so the crime that Luke was about to commit was still extremely rare, which we know unfortunately is not the case today in this country. Luke saw himself as this forever victim. He was being mistreated at home, he was being bullied at school, his girlfriend, it was like the one good thing in his life, broke up with him. He thought that the world did him so wrong and that he was about to fight back. So at 8:06 a.m. at Pearl High School, he began his attack. Luke walked straight up to his ex-girlfriend, 16-year-old Christina Menifee, and at point-blank range, shot her twice, ending her life. And this was actually exactly 1 year to the day that Christina broke up with Luke. Coincidence? I don't think so. Luke then shot and killed the girl that was standing next to Christina, which was 17-year-old Lydia Dew. Luke later said that he actually really liked Lydia and that her older sister was also really nice to him and would actually give him rides to school. Luke just opened fire randomly after this and shot and injured 7 other people before getting back in his mother's car and trying to drive away. The plan was actually for him to go to the junior high school and the elementary school to commit the same kind of crime. But the assistant principal actually went after Luke and in his car kind of drove Luke off the road, got him on the ground until the police could show up to arrest Luke. Luke made a full confession, but at his trial pled not guilty by reason of insanity. He claimed that he had been seeing demons for months and that demons made him do it. His defense also put a lot of the blame on Grant and this group that Luke joined, and saying that Grant manipulated Luke and that Grant drove Luke to kill. Grant and 4 of these other boys were actually arrested and were charged with conspiracy. The other boys' charges were eventually dropped, and one of them was actually the boy that tried to report to the police that Grant and Luke were extremely dangerous and was ignored. Grant was adamant that none of what he said to Luke was ever actually serious and that it was all just pretend. They were really into Dungeons and Dragons, so that was part of his defense. Do you believe him? Let me know in the comments. But eventually he did plead guilty to conspiracy and got a pretty lenient punishment, if you ask me. All Grant had to do was join this little program, and then he was on parole for 5 years. Today he's out free and he's a husband and a father, even though, in my opinion, he planned this crime with Luke. Luke was found guilty on all charges for killing his mother. He was given life in prison for the shooting. He was given 2 life sentences and 7 20-year sentences. His brother and father never once went to a day of his trial, and since he's been in jail, reportedly have only visited him once or twice in prison. Luke says that God has forgiven him, so he used to feel remorse, but now he doesn't feel bad anymore because God forgave him. And in 2010, he actually made a request for the governor asking for clemency. He was rejected. He will actually be eligible for parole in 2046, so in about 20 years, and if he is released, which I don't think he will be 65 years old. What do we think? I know this was really intense. I don't know if it will be controversial. I feel like I know for the most part where the comments are going to be, but let me know all your thoughts and opinions in the comments. But while you are there, please remember to be respectful to the victims. You don't know who could be in the comments. Someone that loved these people that lost their lives could be there, so please just be respectful in the comments. But while you're there, please let me know what case you want to see me cover next. Thank you to everyone that reached out and commented asking me to cover this case, and I will see all of you in my next video. Please, please, please be a good person to your fellow person.
Imagine finding your dream house, a beautiful Dutch colonial that has 3 stories, has 5 bedrooms, a pool, and even a boathouse. The going rate is only $80,000, which shocks you because of how beautiful it is, and it's even in a good location. But just as you were about to buy it, you learn that 1 year prior, an entire family was massacred while they slept in their own beds inside this house. The house was essentially a bloodbath, and this all happened so recently. But would you still buy it? This family did, and they only lasted 28 days in the house before moving out in the middle of the night, leaving all of their personal belongings behind. They claimed the house was haunted and evil, and disturbing things would happen, including the dad waking up at 3 a.m. every single night, which was the exact time that the family before them was murdered. Things would move on their own, they would smell rotting flesh, and the priest who blessed the house claimed that he heard something yell at him to get out. This is the real story behind this movie, the Amityville Horror, which I'm gonna be honest, I watched this when I was 7 and it traumatized me for life, partly because it was based on the real DeFeo family murders, and of course because of the disturbing visuals throughout the movie. So let's bring it all the way back to the beginning when this was just a beautiful house that nothing horrible happened inside of. This is Ronald DeFeo. He lived with his entire family here at this house, located at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, New York. The DeFeo family consisted of Dad, Ronald Sr., Mom Louise, and their 5 children. Ronnie, who was 23 years old at the time time of the murders, Dawn, who was 18, Allison, who was 13, Mark, who was 12, and John, who was 9. They had all lived in this house since they purchased it in 1965, and on the outside, they were a big, happy family who always took care of their neighbors. But behind closed doors, Ronald Sr. was a very controlling man who some say abused his children. But more specifically, he kind of targeted his oldest son, Ronald. Ronald was the black sheep of the family. He was a heavy drinker and drug user, and overall just unreliable. And because of this, he and his dad never really got along. They would fight a lot, and they both had a really short temper. This brings us to November 13th, 1974. It was around 6:30 p.m. when Ronald Jr. ran into a local bar in Amityville, and he yelled that he needed help because he thought that his mom and dad had been shot. So Ronald and a couple of people from the bar all piled into his car and drove the short distance to his home at 112 Ocean Avenue. Ronald waited in the car as they all went inside to investigate, and it was there that they found both Ronald Sr. and his mom Louise dead, and it was a really bloody scene. So they called 911, and when police arrived, they then made another horrific discovery. All 6 members of the DeFeo family outside of Ronald were dead in their beds. They'd all been shot at close range with a .35 caliber rifle, the kids once and the parents twice. What's so creepy is that they were all found in their pajamas face down in their beds, with no evidence of a struggle. After an autopsy was conducted, evidence was found that Louise and Allison were awake at the time of their deaths, yet they were still found face down in their beds. The medical examiner noted that they were all killed at or around 3 a.m. the morning of the 13th. So obviously police started questioning Ronald, who at this point was the sole survivor of this massacre. At first they believed that he was a victim, so he was taken into the police station for protection. This is when Ronald offered the suggestion that the killings were possibly carried out by a local mob hitman. And this sounds far-fetched, but the DeFeo family were reportedly very vocal about having ties to the mob. But once police really started listening to what Ronald was saying, there were a lot of inconsistencies and red flags started flying. The hitman that Ronald suggested turned out to have a strong alibi. He wasn't even in the state at the time of the murders. And then out of nowhere, Ronald confessed. He confessed to killing each of his family members one by one in their beds as they slept, and he said, quote, "Once I started, I just couldn't stop. It went so fast." End quote. He told police that after he shot all 6 members of his family, he took a bath, changed his clothes, and then went to work that morning as if nothing ever happened. Ronald told police exactly where they could find his bloody clothes and other key pieces of evidence, like the rifle he used, which were all dumped behind his house. He then left his family there deceased in their beds for hours until that night at 6:30 p.m. when he told everyone in the bar. Needless to say, Ronald was quickly arrested and his trial began in late 1975. He and his lawyer took the insanity defense and claimed that he had no memory of killing his family. But Ronald also said that there were demons and voices in the home that made him kill his entire family. His drug and alcohol use played a big factor in the trial, and a psychiatrist also diagnosed him with having antisocial personality disorder. The judge said that these were the most heinous murders ever committed in the county since it was founded. Ultimately, Ronald was found guilty of 6 counts of second-degree murder, and he was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. There were a lot of confusing aspects to this case though. One being that all 6 of the victims were found face down in their beds, showing no sign of a struggle. The rifle used in the murders was not fitted with a silencer, and despite Ronald telling police that he drugged his family to make them stay asleep, none of them tested positive for any drugs or sedatives. Some think that more than one person was involved because how could one person walk through a 3-story home, shoot 6 different victims with no silencer, which would obviously be really loud, without anyone hearing? Why didn't anyone get out of their beds that night, and why were there no signs of a struggle? Then people were questioning the motive. Why would Ronald do all of this? Some thought that it could be financially motivated, mixed with him not liking his dad. Ronald apparently asked police before he confessed what he had to do to collect on his dad's life insurance. Some think that he hated his siblings and was jealous of them because his parents seemed to like them better. So with the two in mind, he killed his entire family because that was the only way to 100% inherit all of the money to himself. Over the years, Ronald's account of what happened that night has changed drastically. He has mainly shifted his story to put all of the blame on his sister Dawn. First he said that Dawn killed their dad, and then their mom, being distraught, killed all of his siblings, and then he killed his mom. He said he took the blame at the trial because he was scared of his uncle, who was the captain in the Genovese crime family. He thought his uncle would kill him if he told the truth about his mom snapping. Ronald also went on to say after his conviction that at the time of the murders, he was married to a woman named Geraldine and they lived together in New Jersey. He said that night, his mom called him to come and break up a fight between Dawn and his dad, so so he drove to Amityville with Geraldine's brother Richard. When they got to the house, Don was with an unknown man who fled before Ronald could see him. Together, Don and this man killed their parents and all of their siblings, and then Ronald accidentally killed Don as they struggled over the rifle. He said that Richard was there the entire time and could back up his story, but when authorities went to locate Richard, they couldn't find him. Not because he was off the grid, but because Richard simply just didn't exist. He wasn't a real person. Authorities also found that at the time of the murders, Geraldine was married to someone else and living in upstate New York, so none of what Ronald was saying was true in the slightest. Ronald and Geraldine did eventually get married, but it wasn't until long after the murders and his conviction. Then the very last lie that Ronald ever told about that night and what happened was that he killed his parents along with Dawn and two of their friends. He said they did this out of desperation because his parents had plotted to kill him first. He then said that Dawn killed all of their siblings to eliminate any witnesses, which enraged Ronald, so he knocked her unconscious onto her bed and shot her. Police did find traces of unburned gunpowder on Dawn's nightgown, which sort of backed up his theory, at least to those who didn't have any education on the matter. But this theory was quickly disproven by a ballistics expert who studied the case. They said that unburned gunpowder is discharged through the muzzle of a weapon, and the traces found on Dawn indicate that she was in close proximity to the muzzle when it was fired, but evidence shows that she was not the one to actually fire the rifle. Backing this up and further proving that Ronald was lying was what the medical examiner found. They found no evidence of head trauma on Dawn like Ronald said, only the one gunshot wound to her back, so it seems very clear that Ronald lied about everything other than the fact that he killed his parents. No one else was involved except him. Ronald died in prison in March of 2021. His cause of death has never been released. This brings me to how I started this video. In December of 1975, the Lutz family, consisting of George and Kathy and their 3 kids, stumbled across the DeFeo's home at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville. It was listed for sale for only $80,000, which shocked the Lutz family because of how beautiful and big it was. I mean, along with 5 bedrooms, it also had a pool and a boathouse in the back, so this felt like their dream home. But right before buying it, they learned that just the year before, all 6 of the DeFeo family members had been shot and killed in their beds inside this very same house. So then they were faced with the question, do we buy it or not? It was super cheap and beautiful, so they thought that they could look past it and bought it anyway. After moving in, the Lutz family had a priest come and bless it for a good measure given the history, and while the priest was there, he was slapped by someone or something, and he heard a voice yell at him to get out. Then the family said they began being tormented by evil spirits in the house. George said that they saw slime oozing from the walls, things would move on their own, and they always smelled rotting flesh. They would be kept up at all hours of the night by chilling sounds. The family also said that they always kept the furnace running, but it was ice cold in the house. But what's so disturbing to me is that George said that he saw a demonic pig-like creature with red eyes staring at him in the home, and he would often see his wife Kathy turn into an old woman. And what's so creepy is that George said that he was forcefully woken up every single night at 3 a.m., which was around the time that the DeFeo family was murdered in that house. The Lutz family only lasted 28 days inside this house before abruptly leaving in the middle of the night, leaving all of their personal belongings behind. The Lutz family teamed up with an author, and in 1977, the book The Amityville Horror was published, detailing their haunting experience inside the murder house. 2 years later, a movie was made under the same name, which was remade in 2005. The 2005 version is the one that I watched, and I think at the time I was like 7 years old. It is truly a disturbing movie, and not just because it's based on the real murders of the DeFeo family. The visuals are so creepy, and a couple of the scenes are burned into my brain because of how horrifying they are. It's definitely one of the movies that I still go and put on when I want to be scared. There have been many people who lived in this house since the Lutz family, and none of them have experienced anything evil. This has led many people to think that the Lutz family, specifically George, lied about everything and that it was all just a hoax. George was known to be not a very good man, and when he moved into the house, he was reportedly struggling financially. So some think that he moved in and created this fake ghost story to profit off the murders. The entire family, even the kids, still stand by what they said happened though, even going on to take polygraph tests to prove that they weren't lying. They did pass the polygraph test, so do with that information as you will. George did go on to say that although some of the details were embellished, everything they experienced in that house was real and terrifying. Both George and Kathy have since passed away, but it's now been 51 years, and whatever really happened inside that house causing Ronald to kill his entire family, and what made the Lutz family leave after just 28 days, remains a mystery.
He's the UK version of Chris Watts. One of the most chilling parts of this crime case for me is that the police actually searched this house and somehow missed 2 dead bodies lying on the bed. It was January 2006 in a frosty Hopkinton in Massachusetts. Two ladies pulled up to the home of the Entwistles that night for a dinner party they'd been invited to. Now, the home belonged to Neil and Rachel Entwistle. Neil was originally from Nottingham in the UK, and Rachel was an absolutely lovely woman who had originally lived in the US. The pair had met at university and seemed like a good match. Rachel was beautiful, intelligent, and certainly was a catch for Neil, who kept himself to himself. They decided to get married, have a baby, move back to the US, and it looked like they were living the American dream. Neil worked in IT, and he was always uploading cute family photos to this website that he'd made for the family. When they had their little baby Lillian, he was just always updating the website with cute little baby pictures of her. But she wouldn't even make it to 1 year old. I guess there were signs that Neil was hiding things. I mean, I'll go into loads more detail on my podcast episode about this. Things that I can't discuss, obviously, on TikTok for obvious reasons. He was selling very weird stuff, let's just say, on eBay, and was visiting some very questionable websites. But hindsight is a wonderful thing. I honestly feel like Rachel was far too busy looking after her newborn than caring about what her husband was up to online. The couple were living beyond their means, but Rachel didn't know about this. Neil would always have an answer for where he was getting his money from. He was always on his laptop. He seemed to be making a lot of money. But he was essentially unemployed. He was telling everybody that he'd bought this amazing new car, amazing new house, but in actual fact, these were both rented. And he was racking up a whole lot of debt. Now, Neil's in-laws were trying to be obviously hospitable with Neil moving to the US. They were kind of showing him around the place, showing him how things were done in the US, including introducing him to G's and how they worked. Meanwhile, like I said, Neil was in the background just on these gross little websites, and honestly, he should have been spending his time looking after his wife and taking care of his baby. He was doing some crazy things on the internet. He actually set up a profile on a dodgy website and wrote, "I'm looking to meet American women of all ages. I need to confirm what friends have told me, that you are much better than the women over the ocean, as I'm from there. We both want the same thing, so there is little point dragging it out here." And he even uploaded a photo of himself, if you know what I mean. So like I said, on the 27th of January, the two friends pulled up outside the home, but nobody was answering, which was weird because they'd literally been invited by Rachel and she never just flaked on plans. So they called police. Police showed up and picked the lock and crept inside. Everything inside the house just felt eerily like people had kind of left very last minute. It was like there were still plates out from when they'd eaten, there was still bathwater in the bath. But after glancing in each room, the officer was like, "No, nobody's here." He was wrong. Two friends, bless them, were so anxious that even when police drove away and said nobody's inside the house, they still sat outside that home praying that the family would come back. When they still hadn't returned the following day, police came back to do another check. This time there was a smell, and it was coming from the master bedroom. On that bed were a big pile of duvets basically, and under the duvets was an absolutely horrifying sight. The bodies of Rachel and Lillian had been lay there all along. They were both dressed in pajamas, cuddling up on the bed, bless them, and they'd both been shot. Nobody could believe this. It was obviously absolutely devastating, but they then had a thought: where the hell is the husband? Either maybe he's in danger too, or he's killed somewhere too, or he's on the run. In a crazy turn of events, 36 hours later, he showed up in England. He just rocked up at his parents' house, knocked on the door and said, "My wife and child are dead." They called the police. He tried to explain to them and the police on this 2-hour-long telephone call that he had just found them like that, panicked, and booked a flight to the UK. You can hear portions of this call in my podcast episode where I do a full deep dive on this, but it's wild. He's basically telling a whole bunch of lies. Police ended up figuring out that the weapon used to kill Rachel and Lillian was actually Joseph, the dad's G, which Neil did actually have access to, knew how to use, and he even had a key to their home so that he could help himself. Neil also was despicably found to be trying to profit off the murders very soon after they happened and try and sell his story to the highest bidder. And his laptop showed something even more disturbing than things that I've already obviously discussed. His Google searches just prior to the murders basically gave him away. He'd been looking for quick self-unaliving methods and had also written on Google "knife in neck kill." He didn't even go to his wife and child's funeral. That's how little he cared. He was extradited back to the US, but his despicable actions would not end there. He actually tried to use as his defense in court that Rachel had done this to herself and her child. Honestly, the lowest of the low, but thank God the jury did not buy this and he was given life in prison without the possibility of parole.
The last time 15-year-old Leah Anderson would be seen alive was when she left her house in God's Lake Narrows to go ice skating on January 4th, 2013. 2 days later, her badly disfigured body would be found near a snowmobile trail. Initially, it was believed she had been mauled by wolves or wild dogs, but the autopsy revealed she had been beaten to death and a male's DNA was found on her. What should have made this investigation easier was that this is a small, remote community in Manitoba, Canada, with only 2 ways into it, by ice road or plane, and on the weekend of her murder, the road was closed. So when the RCMP arrived, her killer was almost certainly still in God's Lake Narrows, likely part of the community, but the investigators left within a few days and her killer has never been brought to justice.
This 22-year-old daycare worker was caught abusing over 20 babies and toddlers. Roxana Leka was born in Poland, but as a teenager moved to West London where our case takes place. In 2023, Roxana started her career working in childcare like daycares and nurseries. And in 2024, she started her position at Riverside Nurseries. Here, the children that Roxana would be caring after were averaging in ages between like 10 months old and 2 years old, so like extremely young babies. And choosing to work being surrounded by a bunch of very young babies can be incredibly stressful. So you would assume that anyone that would choose to go into that profession would be like really passionate about it and really love children. Reportedly, parents were spending £1,900 or over $2,500 per month per child to send their children to this nursery. And every parent hopes that when they send their kids to school, a babysitter's house, a daycare, that their kids are going to be taken care of. But I'm sure with those parents spending that kind of money, they assume that their kids are going to be getting like the best care possible. But several parents began reporting that their little babies and toddlers were coming home from the nursery with red marks, scratches, bruises all over their little bodies. And there was no explanation for this. Also, several co-workers of Roxana started noticing these scratches and bruises on these babies after Roxana was alone with them. Several of them also noticed that Roxana was like pretty rough with these babies. She certainly wasn't like handling them with care. And that brings us to June 28th, 2024. A co-worker witnessed and then reported to management that Roxana pinched a baby until it cried. And this is clearly very concerning. There was already a bunch of rumors floating around. So management went and they looked at the CCTV cameras at the time that this co-worker reported Roxana was abusing this baby. And on the security cameras, they saw Roxana pinching this little baby on its mouth, its face, its wrists, just all over its body, deliberately trying to harm this little baby. Roxana was immediately suspended from her position, but now the nursery needed to find out if this was an isolated incident or something that she was doing all the time. They got the police involved and together they reviewed all of the available CCTV footage they had from Roxana's shifts, and this was over 300 hours of footage. And they discovered dozens and dozens and dozens of incidents of Roxana abusing these little babies and toddlers. And this is absolutely horrific abuse. And I'm gonna tell you a little bit about what they saw. To these vulnerable, little defenseless babies, Roxana would pinch them, scratch them, she would slap them, she would twist their toes, pull their hair, punch them, and kick them. And most of these times, it wasn't even like it was out of frustration, not that it would make it okay. There's never an excusable reason to abuse, harm a child. But the reason I point that out is because she was doing this just because she wanted to, because she liked it. It's like so sick in the head. There was one incident where Roxana just walked past this little baby minding its own business. It wasn't crying or anything, and unprovoked, Roxana just slapped it in the face. She would drag toddlers across the floor by their hair. She would grab them by their necks. She would push them, throw them. She would throw them on their heads. She was also always smoking in front of these babies, and she would like blow it out in them, like at them while they were sleeping in their cots. There was one incident with a little toddler boy. He couldn't have been any older than 2 years old. Roxana kicked him in the head and the face repeatedly, just over and over again. And while this little boy was on the floor crying, she came up and she stomped him on his shoulder. There were days where a single child would suffer abuse at the hands of Roxana Lecca dozens of times in a single day. There were incidents where Roxana would smother these little babies for a short amount of time, but this she's escalating to a more dangerous place because it does not take a very long time to smother a baby to end its life. So this is just absolutely horrific abuse. I mean, these are babies. They're vulnerable. They can't defend themselves. They can't speak. They can't tell anyone what's happening to them. How much damage did she cause, not just to their bodies, but to their little impressionable minds? There's so much trauma here, and there's so much healing that needs to happen, not just for the babies, but for the families. How can the parents ever be expected to trust anyone ever again? And in the footage they had available for them, they saw that Roxana Lecca had abused over 20 babies and toddlers. And on July 5th, 2024, at her home, she was arrested. At the station, she refused to speak to anyone. She was denying that she did anything wrong. She was charged with 24 counts of child cruelty, and despite a mountain of evidence against her, they literally had her on camera doing these things. She pled not guilty. When her trial started, she ultimately pled guilty to 7 counts of child cruelty, but kept saying that she was innocent of the other 17. I don't know if she was trying to make a plea deal or something, but they were not interested. And at her trial, she was really trying to play up that she was just this young girl who doesn't know anything and didn't know what she was doing was wrong. But in June of 2025, she was convicted on 21 counts of child cruelty, and she was sentenced to 8 years in prison, which is a long time, but by the time she gets out, she'll be 30, in her early 30s. Parents of some of the victims believe that if Roxana Lecca hadn't been caught, she would have kept escalating her abuse until she ultimately killed a child. Let me know what your thoughts are, because honestly, I agree. But I'm absolutely interested to hear your thoughts on that. Also interested to hear what you think we can do to make sure that something like this never happens again. So interested to hear all your thoughts in the comments. While you're there, please be respectful to the families of these victims. These are really young people that we are discussing, and these families have a lot of healing they're gonna have to go through. So let me know your thoughts in the comments, but please be respectful. And while you're there, please let me know what case you want to see me cover next. Thank you to everyone that suggested that I cover this case, and I will see you guys all next time in my next video. Please be a good person to your fellow person.
This is why you should always be careful who you live with. Al Kite put up an ad to rent out a room in his Aurora, Colorado townhome. On May 19, 2004, a man who called himself Robert Cooper answered the ad, saying he desperately needed a place to stay since he had just moved there to start a new job. Cooper had the money for rent, so Al allowed him to move in, unaware that the man had approached several potential landlords in that area. And all of them recall him having different characteristics, like a limp or an accent, as if he was playing a new character for each potential witness. When Al didn't show up for work a few days later, the police were dispatched to his home and found a gruesome scene. He was bound with his hands and feet behind him and tortured for hours before being stabbed to death 22 times. And the killer, who was believed to have stayed in the house for days afterwards, was never caught.
This was the last time she was ever captured on her Ring doorbell, because within the hour she was murdered. It was August 2021 in Nuneaton. Megan Newborough was a 23-year-old girl. She was stunning, she was sociable, she was an HR advisor. She had absolutely no problem getting male attention, and somebody's eye she caught was a guy called Ross who she worked with. Now this was 30-year-old Ross McCullum, and they met through work. Like I said, the pair had started dating. I don't feel like they were boyfriend and girlfriend. They were certainly more than friends, but I'm gonna call him her boyfriend for the purposes of this video. They got on really well. They were attracted to each other. They were going on dates. They were hanging out together. They were sleeping together. You know, it was kind of like a bit of a situationship at this point, I feel. But just a short time into them getting to know each other, things would turn into a living nightmare for Megan. On the 6th of the month, it was a Friday night, and Megan left her home at around 7:30 in great spirits. Now, she told her family that she was going out for a walk, but she was actually going to go to Ross's house because he had a free house, and it would kind of obviously give them a little bit of privacy. But tragically, she had no idea what was about to happen to her. Now, Megan's family got really concerned when she failed to return home that night. It was really out of character for her, and she would just never just dip and not tell them that she wasn't going to be home. She always kept in contact, so yeah, this was just really worrying them right from the get-go. They did wait overnight to see if she would eventually come back. You know, she was an adult at the end of the day, and maybe she had plans to stay the night at somebody's house, but she didn't come back. So by this point, the family was absolutely frantic. They'd been ringing her all evening. She wasn't answering her phone. They were also contacting her friends and people who knew her, and they hadn't seen her either. So around midday the next day, they did have to, unfortunately, report her missing to the police. Now, meanwhile, they were doing everything they possibly could to try and trace her, and I believe one of her family members at least had her on Find My iPhone. So Megan's family were able to track the phone to where it was last seen, and they ended up following the trail, and suddenly when they found the phone, they were even more concerned. The phone was just dumped in a random bush. Now, they knew Megan obviously wouldn't have done this herself, so this was ringing all sorts of alarm bells. Police were like, at this point, it's very likely to have been a kidnap, and they needed to speak to anybody who knew her, including this boyfriend, Ross. Now, he initially told police, yep, I was with her that night, we spent a bit of time together, and then she left at 9 p.m. to go and get a McDonald's. And while this was going on, police were looking at Megan's phone, and they found that, kind of suspiciously, Ross had actually left her a lot of text messages on her phone that night and sent her an answer phone message basically saying how much he loved her. This just felt like a bit of overkill. Like, was it him trying to cover his tracks? And police started digging into communications between Ross and Megan, and they found out that Ross had been a victim of child SA, and he had shared this with Megan, and she was super supportive, and she actually was like totally there for him. And she also suggested that he told his manager at work so that they could support him too. Police could tell from the text messages that Ross was telling the truth. Megan had actually been to his house the night. They could see that they were kind of like planning to meet up ahead of time, so that aligned with his story. However, why was her phone chucked in the bush? Well, Ross all of a sudden started just spilling everything, started admitting to what he had done. And the truth is so much worse than you could ever imagine. Megan got to his house, and at some point he strangled her. And to make sure she was dead, he got a kitchen knife and tried to cut her throat. Once he was convinced he'd strangled and stabbed her in the neck enough, he then decided to clean up the lounge and change his clothes. He bundled Megan's body into Megan's own car. He then drove Megan's own car to the outskirts of town and chucked her just randomly in the woodlands. He also obviously chucked her phone in the bush, that's why it was there. He abandoned her car and keys there to make it look like he wasn't anything to do with this, and got a taxi back to his house. But I don't see how he thought he was going to get away with this. He literally got a taxi right from the place where he's abandoned her body. He then callously thought he could get away with this, so he sent her loads of texts saying how amazing she was. But the next part is possibly the most disturbing of all. Police found evidence that he'd been on some disgusting websites looking at serial killers and indecent images and videos. He tried to claim that he acted out of blind rage, having been triggered because of his past SA, but the jury honestly saw right through this. He was jailed for life with a minimum term of 23 years, and multiple inmates since he's been in prison have actually said that he's been going around the prison just bragging about this murder.